Okay, so then moving on to think about how propensity scores compare with multivariable analysis. Are there any questions before we talk about this? Sorry, just behind you.
Sorry. So this propensity score calculation is kind of like a dimensionally reduction.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
If this dimensional reduction happens, there must be some information we lost. So why just we match the population with the same sex, same age, or same education level, such background variables directly, and then compile their results.
Oh, so why not just individually match?
Yeah.
Ah, well,
rather than calculate the.
Yeah, good question. If you individually match, you will run out of potential matches, so you won't find people who are identical. When you propensity score match, so if I take one person with a score of 0.8 and match them with another person of 0.8, the two people won't have the score of 0.8 for exactly the same reasons. So it may be that they are both men in their 60s, but one smokes and the other has diabetes, which seems to get them a score that's quite similar. So I matched them on the score. But if I wanted to individually match, I couldn't match those two people. It then works out that because I'm doing this on a large population, that although the individuals are not matched on exactly the same covariates, the distribution of covariates through the population then becomes very similar if I've done a good job with the propensity score model. So that's one reason why you would do this rather than individually matching, because you wouldn't find enough people to match on.
So if using different models to calculate the scores, the result will be large influenced?
Yeah, potentially. So yeah, it depends very heavily on what you put in your propensity score model. That's a really important factor. Yeah. So they're not magic. You'll hear some people talk about them as though we must only ever use them because they're so much better than multivariable. I don't believe that. I think that they have some advantages and some disadvantages, and that we need to be aware that they are only as good as the data that we've got access to and that we can measure. So there will still be things within the data, or not within the data, there will still be factors that are different between patients potentially, but that we couldn't account for, and they won't help with that.
And I have a concern that even the people who have similar propensity scores, is their covariant or variable background information is the exact similar or not? Even the scores is same, maybe their background information is not similar.
So do you mean you're worried because my people with score 0.8, one of them's a smoker and one's got diabetes? Or
yeah, my worry is if even the probability of is the same, if that score is the same, but the sex or education or some other variables, the value of the variable is not the same.
right, okay, so on an individual level between patients, because it's a big population and those factors will even out, that doesn't matter. What would matter is if I've measured the variables better on some people than on other people. That would then still be a big problem. It would also be a problem if I was doing a multivariable model. So they suffer from some of the same problems as each other.
So it's kind of limitation?
Yeah.
It's not a perfect method?
Absolutely not a perfect method. Sometimes I use them, sometimes I don't for various reasons, and I've found sometimes journal editors or reviewers will send a comment back to say, we don't believe your results because you didn't use propensity scores, which to me implies that they don't really know or they don't really understand what we were doing, because there is nothing magic about
So
this method.
we use different methods to calculate and to compare the results.
Yeah, you can do. In fact, so in this example here, I haven't shown it on a slide, but we also did it as a multivariable regression. We got the same answer. The only reason you might get a different answer is if you're, so if I go back, so you could see here that, in fact, it didn't really matter which categories we included in the analysis. The answer was quite similar. If the answer had been quite different in our primary analysis, then a multivariable approach would have given us a different answer. And to me, that would be the only advantage of this method, is that it helps us to properly select the group of people that we really should be comparing. But other than that, the data are the same. So the information we're putting in from the variables, whether it goes into the propensity score or into a multivariable model, it's all the same data. So it really doesn't make much difference. Does that help? Okay.
So my question is, so is the two groups truly comparable? So the distribution of propensity score within two groups seems quite different. So as you said, the unmeasured confounding factor may influence the two propensity score can be different from the major propensity score.
Yeah.
And although the propensity score analysis very strong method, these two groups don't seem so comparable and quite different. And so no statistical method can completely adjust the difference between two groups. So are there any good method to
so you're absolutely right. It's possible that, so I mean, using the propensity score means that we were able to adjust for the differences between groups that we could measure. But in the same way as it would happen in a multivariable model, if the data that we've got are imperfect, and they are imperfect, or if there are other variables that we should have included but we didn't have access to, then there could be residual confounding. There could absolutely still be all of those problems that we haven't got around. We have to make the assumption in our final model that all other confounding has been dealt with, and we know this isn't true. Okay. We know this isn't true, but we have to make the assumption and then say a limitation is that we could still have other confounding. But yeah, we can't get around that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
My question is about variable selection. Can we use same variable to calculate propensity score and logistic regression adjust to adjust for confounding?
Yeah. Yeah. You can do, in fact. So if we've done matching rather than adjustment, it turns out that when you do matching between exposed and unexposed on their propensity scores, if you do a great job, then the balance of covariates is going to be very good. Sometimes, even when you pick the best match, let's say that the distribution of ages is a bit different between the two groups, then in your Poisson model or Cox model, you could then also adjust for age. That would be completely fine. Yeah.
Can you talk something about high-dimensional propensity?
High-dimensional propensity. Has anybody come across the term high-dimensional propensity scores? These are, so I've shown you an example here where there were 30 variables in the model. You could have a model where you have about 500 variables. Okay, so you would never do this in a multivariable model because it would just break down. But the theory is, so let's take diabetes as an example. So I could split that into, so in my propensity score here, I simply have a binary variable, does somebody have diabetes, yes or no? You could split that into, does somebody have type 1 diabetes or type 2 diabetes? If they've got type 1 diabetes, do they consult their GP for it rarely, occasionally, or very frequently? And if they've got type 1 diabetes, are they taking insulin, yes or no? If they're taking insulin, are they taking high dose or medium dose or low dose? If they're type 2 diabetes, are they taking insulin plus oral antidiabetics? So there are whole ways of then going into much, much more detail on what might be considered to be a single variable. And the theory behind this is that we will not only better adjust for those individual confounders, but we may also, by proxy, adjust for things that we can't measure, like frailty, for example, because maybe the frailer patients need to consult more often for all of their diseases. So even though we don't have a measure of frailty, maybe we will by proxy adjust for it. And there are then automated ways of looking at the data to work out which of these many, many high dimensional variables are most associated with the outcome that we're interested in, how are they associated with the exposure, and how common are they in our data set, and then ranks these variables so that we can choose the most common 500. Yeah. So this is a different way of looking at propensity scores. Yeah.
So you mentioned that there could be maybe 50, 500 variables, for example. In multivariate analysis, you would do the multi-collinearity test before selecting the variables. I've never done a propensity score before, so would you take those into consideration before selecting the variable as well?
Yeah, so you could do that within your logistic regression model. You can look at collinearity in that model. Yeah.
But you wouldn't do the same for propensity score analysis?
In the cohort analysis that you then go on to do, no. Yeah. Okay, so that's it. We were going to talk about how they compare. So I've covered some of this. So mostly the results of a multivariable and a propensity score analysis would be very similar. It'd be very unusual for them to give you very different answers. Where I think propensity scores have a big advantage is there are two things. First of all, if you've got a very large number of confounders and you've got a rare outcome, then if you want to do a multivariable regression model, you may not be able to include all of the variables that you want to, just because of the rule of 10, say, where you would run out of the ability to adjust for all those confounders. The other reason why I think they've got an advantage is they allow us to see within our study population who is genuinely comparable, and so that I can get rid of the obese burger eating guys and the yoga women from my study population. They give me an opportunity to do this. Where multivariable analysis has a distinct advantage is that in our final analysis model, it will show me the association between each individual variable and the outcome. So I can see, is smoking in my model behaving in the way that I would expect it to? I won't be able to see that in a propensity score analysis. Really importantly, both methods still don't account for unknown confounding. And I think that people accept this easily with multivariable approaches, but there seems to be this myth with propensity scores that we've dealt with all confounding, especially if our baseline table makes people look very similar. But be very careful, it still has the same problems. Okay. So that's the end of the talk. Are there any questions before we do the workshop part?
So when we choose the covalent in to estimate the propensity score, so should we include all possible confounding factor, or we should choose the only variable related to outcomes, or so on? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, so it turns out that we can potentially run into problems of statistical efficiency if we include, it's counterintuitive, if we include variables which are only associated with the exposure, that can be a problem for our confidence intervals. In theory, we want to include everything that's a traditional confounder, so something that's associated with the exposure and with the outcome we definitely want to have in the model. It turns out we can somehow improve statistical efficiency if we include variables that are only associated with the outcome as well. But mostly it's going to be variables that are associated with both.